unknown depth, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other world. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. Theodore Roosevelt. The UN is but a long range international banking apparatus clearly set up for financial and economic profit by a small group of powerful one world revolutionaries hungry for profit and power. Curtis Bean Dahl. No one will enter the New World Order unless he or she will make a pledge to worship Lucifer. No one will enter the New Age unless he will take a Luciferian initiation. David Spangler. The idea was that those who direct the overall conspiracy could use the differences in those two so called ideologies, Marxism, fascism, socialism versus democracy, capitalism, to enable them, the Illuminati, to divide larger and larger portions of the human race into opposing camps so that they could be armed and then brainwashed into fighting and destroying each other. Myron Fagan. The drive of the Rockefellers and their allies is to create a one world government combining super capitalism and communism under the same tent, all under their control. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. I am convinced there is such a plot, international in scope, generations old in planning, and incredibly evil in intent. Larry McDonald. Welcome, friends, and as always, thank you for joining me this evening as we peruse all things esoteric and as we jump into the rabbit hole of conspiracy reality. Who knows where we're going to end up and on which side of the plane of the earth we're going to come up, but it's going to be a very intriguing journey. And tonight, I'm going to reveal a lot of things that probably have not been put together in this manner. And it's necessary because I realize that, especially with the events of 9/11, that so many alive today have no connection to the occurrence of that day and how powerful of a declaration of war it was against the world. That in those moments, the shadow government openly declared war and singed the memory of that attack against humanity into the minds of all people everywhere. Because the video of the planes crashing into the World Trade Centers leading to what was the official story of their collapse and how there were people already on the spot in strategic place to comment and to point the finger to Al Qaeda and to blame Osama bin Laden and other terrorists and terrorist factions, that all of that was orchestrated, set up. And so many people are not familiar and little familiar with the conspiracy reality of that day. And I know that probably, well, a lot of the shows that we've covered in truth have been scrubbed. And I'm going to, of course, be careful and try to tread lightly, but I do want to connect the dots of the bigger picture of how we got to where we are. And just to remind people of some of the things that, especially the youth and those that are coming up wanting to make sense of the world, but having no guidance, no direction, no one to instruct them, are having great difficulty in making sense of what is going on in regard to the false left right paradigm and how it is that you are being led astray into siding with the left or the right in whatever form it is taking shape, that always minorities are created, the masses are divided, and people are pinned against one another and slaughtered. And the result is death and misery. And people can't understand why, because the origins of evil are so smeared and diffused and darkened and veiled that the world majority is confused and cannot make sense of how to interpret current events and things that are going on. And so I'm gonna share a few things, the history that you can look to and study for yourself. And I do believe if you examine these pieces of the puzzle that I'm going to bring forth and connect, and that hopefully in considering what I'm going to speak about, you will then be able to see clearer the bigger picture and the underlying truth that is connecting all of what seems to be just disjointed and unconnected pieces of truth. And this has a lot to do with what is going on now in Israel with the war against the Palestinian people and Hamas, and with the ground forces going in. Because what happened over the last week with the slaughter and the massacre of many Israelites and children and older people, families, the massacre that happened where these Hamas terrorists were allowed to, and I say allowed to because that's exactly what happened, in my opinion, that the breaching of the border and their entrance into Israel and the slaughter that took place over 4, 6, however many hours that the campaign occurred, and the many people that did lose their lives, that Israel is so sophisticated in their technology when it comes to fighting against terrorism and securing their boundaries and borders and populations, that, and also, the many people that are involved with the IDF and the individuals that were drafted into military service, which includes men and women, and most of the citizens of Israel have to do um, and have a duty to enter into the armed forces and to be knowledgeable about the defense of their nation. And many of them have come forward and have shared their concerns of how and knowledge that they know in their heart that this was not a failure on behalf of the intelligence services of Israel to detect and to combat the insurgents that breached the border and committed this atrocity, but that they're like the events that happened here in America on September 11th, 2001, which so many people now are not even old enough to remember. I've spoken to so many that have listened to our shows and have been touched by the work that we do that have no memory and did not do the research which was so critical in my life to leading me to understanding and to coming to knowledge on the New World Order, the focus and the efforts, the reality of the secret societies and their efforts to bring forth what is spoken about in Albert Pike's vision of fomenting these three world wars as pretext to bring in a one world order, which I think most people now understand, know about, and have heard about the New World Order. This is certainly not anything new, but that this agenda has been a focus of the fallen ones, especially Lucifer, Satan, the light bearer, Halal, the son of the morning, Samael, the angel and viper of death, that this angel, since his rebellion against the Most High and in leading one third of the angels astray with him, and also in birthing his own bloodline, in beguiling Eve and seducing her, he impregnated her with the firstborn son of the devil, Cain, who, being of the wicked one, is the progenitor of the seed of the serpent that is and has been at enmity with the seed of the woman, the children of Adam, and that the sons of Belial, the hybrid giants and the demigods and those that are trying to intermingle themselves amongst the seed of men, that this radical evil, this reptilian race, this brood of vipers, this cousin of humanity, this hybrid race of being, they are hidden in plain sight right here with us and have been for a very long time, that they were cast out of the heavens long before even our ancestors, Adam and Eve, were. And that there is now discovery all over the world, especially with this satellite ground penetrating radar, um, whatever the technology is that they're able to look into and see beneath the overgrowth of jungle cover, trees and vines and overgrowth, that there are ancient dwellings, constructions, megalithic, cyclopean sites spread worldwide that had been created at a time when science would have you believe that humanity was, nothing more than monkey. And there is now discernment coming forth, which is piquing the interest of people and allowing them to comprehend that there's a whole other side of what has been portrayed in the supernatural, in the mythology, the origins, the what science would call fantasy or fairy tale, even in the children's stories, that there is more truth to what has been said than we are being told. And so tonight, the show is entitled Blowback. And the reason I called it that is because of an article that I'm going to share, which speaks about how it is that Benjamin Netanyahu and how the Likud party, which was a political uh, party headed by, and which was dominant and held power and still does in Israel, how it was that they funded the creation of Hamas, the same terrorist organization that they are now promising to go after and to wipe out. And that this was done long ago as a way to overthrow the Palestinian Liberation Organization that was created and run by Yasser Arafat, and that he was poisoned and removed from power. And this is a side of history that, again, most people know little about. And it shows the importance of understanding, again, how the left right paradigm, that the elites, the globalists, which have no allegiance to people or nation, but only to the secret societies and to the blood oaths that they take in worshiping their father, the devil, that the scriptures reveal and show to us that our real enemy are those that have been at war against the prophets and the saints for a very long time that they are the ones that slaughtered the apostles and even conspired and were so bold as to murder the Son of God, the Savior, the Messiah, which took away the sins of the world, and defeating death restored those of us that are fallen and that were born into this world, restored us to our first estate, and has given us a chance to be redeemed, to be rectified, that we can have eternal life. The greatest, the most amazing gift. And so, before reading that article, however, I want to share with you a few other things, going back a little bit further to discussions of how it was that the American CIA and other intelligence agencies, other alphabet groups, how they were also involved with the creation of terrorist groups, and how this goes back generations, even to the of what we know to be the Afghan war, where Russia was defeated and wasted and used a lot of resources in trying to take over Afghanistan in the same manner that the United States did just recently, and of which Biden just abandoned the people there that assisted and tried to help the Americans in overcoming the Taliban, which they were also a creation and were funded by the Pakistani ISI, that the CIA also funded and created them. So I want to just share something really quickly. It's an article about Osama bin Laden being created by the United States. And for those that don't know, that Osama bin Laden was a really good friend of the Bush family, HW and George HW, and um, the governor of Florida. Um, and so we're going to look at that too, because this is going to help to explain some of the other things that we'll get into. All right, give me just a minute to take some water. So I'll read this article, share it, and then I'll check the chat room. And I will take questions, and I want to share your commentary, especially in the second hour. But for the first part, I want to set up some of these things and share some of these articles. And we're also going to look at Albert Pike's vision of what is the fulfillment of Zechariah 12, the Jerusalem becoming a cup of trembling amongst the nations and a burdensome stone. which is all very important because, again, it leads to what is happening right now with the war between the Zionists, as it is cited again in Albert Pike's vision, the Zionists and the radical Islamists, and that this conflict would lead the whole world into struggle. Okay, so here's what it says. Bin Laden is a product of the U.S. spy agencies, according to an article in the Tribune de Genève by Richard Lavery, the writer of the book Les Dollars de la Terreur. The first contact with bin Laden was in 1979 when the new graduate from the University of Jeddah got in touch with the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, Turkey. With the help of the CIA and the U.S. Armed Forces Intelligence Services, he began to organize in the early 1980s and network to raise money and to recruit fighters for the Afghan Mujahideens that were fighting the Soviets. He did this from the city of Peshawar in Pakistan. Part of these activities were financed with the production and sale of morphine, the base of heroin, and this was the beginning of today's Al Qaeda, which means the base network led by bin Laden. Indeed, the chickens are coming home to roost for the CIA and the United States bosses. Another article. This is from the Times of India, London. The Central Intelligence Agency worked in tandem with Pakistan to create the monster that is today Afghanistan's ruling Taliban. A leading U.S. expert on South Asia said here, quote, I warned them that we were creating a monster. Selig Harrison from the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars said at the conference here last week on terrorism and regional security, managing the challenges in Asia. Harrison said the CIA made a historic mistake in encouraging Islamic groups from all over the world to come to Afghanistan. The U.S. provided $3 billion for building up these Islamic groups, and it accepted Pakistan's demand that they should decide how this money should be spent, Harrison said. Harrison, who spoke before the Taliban assault on the Buddhist statues was launched, told the gathering of security experts that he had meetings with CIA leaders at the time when Islamic forces were being strengthened in Afghanistan. Quote, they told me these people were fanatical, and the more fierce they were, the more fiercely they would fight the Soviets, he said. I warned them that we were creating a monster. Harrison, who has written 5 books on Asian affairs and U.S. relations with Asia, has had extensive contact with the CIA and political leaders in South Asia. Harrison was a senior associate of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace between 1974 and 1996. Harrison, who is now senior fellow with the Century Foundation, recalled a conversation he had with the late General Zia-ul-Haq of Pakistan. Quote, General Zia spoke to me about expanding Pakistan's sphere of influence to control Afghanistan, then Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and then Iran and Turkey. Harrison said that design continues, he said. General Muhammad Aziz, who was involved in that Zia plan, has been elevated now to a key position by Chief Executive General Pervez Musharraf, Harrison said. The old associates between the intelligence agencies continue, Harrison said. This quote, the CIA still has close links with the Pakistani ISI, the Inter Services Intelligence. Today, that money and those weapons have helped build up the Taliban, Harrison said. Quote, the Taliban are not just recruits from madrasas, Muslim theological schools, but are on the payroll of the ISI, the Inter Services Intelligence, the intelligence wing of the Pakistani government. The Taliban are now, quote, making a living out of terrorism, end quote. Just a little bit more, just two more paragraphs, and then we'll move on to something else because even though I got so much information here, but I know I have to just bring forth what I can. Harrison said that the UN Security Council resolution number 1333 calls for an embargo on arms to the Taliban, quote, but it is a resolution without teeth because it does not provide sanctions for non-compliance, he said. And, quote, the U.S. is not backing the Russians who want to give more teeth to the resolution. Now it is Pakistan that, quote, holds the key to the future of Afghanistan, Harrison said. The creation of the Taliban was central to Pakistan's pan-Islamic vision, Harrison said. It came after, quote, the CIA made the historic mistake of encouraging Islamic groups from all over the world to come to Afghanistan. He said the creation of the Taliban have been, quote, actively encouraged by the ISI and the CIA. Pakistan has been building up Afghan collaborators who will sustain Pakistan. He said, all right, I'm not going to go into it, but just know this as well that I've got, like I said, I've got a number of other articles, but I'm not going to go into it. But I did want to bring up this one. And this was during the time that America had invaded Afghanistan and they were using the Northern Alliance. The CIA was working on the ground with the Northern Alliance to attack and to destroy the Taliban, which they had decades earlier funded and created. And the special forces, they were going after Osama bin Laden, which again is a CIA asset and has been working closely. You know, like I said, he, in red here, he was the one that helped the CIA to establish Al Qaeda, the base, which means the base. And so he was a CIA asset for a very long time and very close member of the Bush family. Even so much that his relatives were allowed to leave and to fly out of the United States during a time when all other flights were grounded and nobody else was allowed to move through the skies or to enter into or leave American air space. And yet, as Michael Moore showed in his documentary, Fahrenheit 9/11, that the bin Ladens were allowed to leave. And this is at a time that supposedly Osama bin Laden had masterminded the events and the attacks of 9/11 against American citizens. Which made him, at that time, the most wanted terrorist and criminal anywhere in the world. But anyways, as Seymour Hersh shared, that when the special forces finally had by American C-130 aircraft, and the special forces, they were pissed, to say the least. They were upset that they were not allowed to complete the mission, and they knew very clearly after bin Laden and these other terrorists were flown and given safe refuge that some portion of the American government was working with them and working for them and protecting them from retribution. And another thing with regard to 9/11 that a lot of people don't consider is that American assets and military forces were put into place and sent so that the invasion on Iraq and Afghanistan could happen immediately after the attacks of 9/11, and that these placements were done months in advance of the attacks of that day. And so somebody knew something somewhere. And it has also been confirmed that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, they were on the ground in New York on September 10th, and that they were already given orders to interact with the mainstream media and to put clearly the blame on bin Laden and Al Qaeda. And so that narrative was already spoken about and shared and was the official story, the narrative. before anything ever occurred. And then, the passport of Muhammad Atta being found, after the supposed plane was hijacked and it survived the fire and the destruction of the plane and the building, confirming, again that Al Qaeda was behind these events. But anyway, so you can look to that. Seymour Hersh wrote the article, the story about, bin Laden being protected and flown to safety. All right, so I want to read now a little bit from this blowback article. How Israel went from helping to create Hamas to bombing it. Hamas wants to destroy Israel, right? But as Mehdi Hassan shows in a new video on blowback, Israeli officials admit that they helped start the group. This was released February 19, 2018. It's written by Mehdi Hassan and Dina Sayed-Daman. Hamas is sworn to destroy Israel, ? That it's a terrorist group prescribed both by the United States and the European Union, that it rules Gaza with an iron fist, that it's killed hundreds of innocent Israelis with rocket, mortar, and suicide attacks. But did you also know that Hamas, which is an Arabic acronym for the Islamic Resistance Movement, would probably not exist today were it not for the Jewish state? That the Israelis helped turn a bunch of fringe Palestinian Islamists in the late 1970s into one of the world's most notorious militant groups. That Hamas is blowback. This isn't a conspiracy theory. Listen to former Israeli officials such as Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev, who was the Israeli military governor in Gaza in the early 1980s. Segev later told a New York Times reporter that he had helped finance the Palestinian Islamist movement as a counterweight to the secularists and leftists of the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Fatah Party, led by Yasser Arafat, who himself referred to Hamas as a creature of Israel. Quote, the Israeli government gave me a budget, the retired brigadier general confessed, and the military government gives to the mosque. Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation. Avner Cohen, a former Israeli religious affairs official who worked in Gaza for more than 2 decades, told the Wall Street Journal in 2009, back in the mid 1980s, that Cohen even wrote an official report to his superiors. warning them not to play divide and rule in the occupied territories by backing the Palestinian Islamists against the Palestinian seculars. I suggest focusing our efforts on finding ways to break up this monster before this reality jumps in our face, he wrote. They didn't listen to him. And Hamas, as I explained in the fifth installment of my short film series, For the Intercept on Blowback, was the result. To be clear, first, the Israelis helped build up a militant strain of Palestinian political Islam in the form of Hamas and its Muslim Brotherhood precursors. Then the Israelis switched tack and tried to bomb, besiege, and blockade it out of existence. In the past decade alone, Israel has gone to war with Hamas 3 times in 2009, 2012, and 2014, killing around 2,500 Palestinian citizens in Gaza in the process. Meanwhile, Hamas has killed far more Israeli civilians than any secular Palestinian militant group. This is the human cost of blowback. Quote, when I look back at the chain of events, I think we made a mistake, David Hasham, a former Arab affairs expert in the Israeli military, who was based in Gaza in the 1980s, later remarked. But at the time, nobody thought about the possible results. They never do they? And the author again is Mehdi Hassan Mehdi. Now I know we only got 1 minute, so I'm just going to read the title of this article and we'll get into it after the break. It says, for years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. The premier's policy of treating the terror group as a partner at the expense of Abbas and Palestinian statehood has resulted in wounds that will take Israel years to heal from. Now, this is also one of the things that people don't know is that Hamas was used, the terrorist group was used to prevent statehood for the Palestinians. The two statehood solution or, whatever the agreement, every time they were going to come to discuss and to, possibly bring such agreement to reality, there was always an instigation where Hamas as a terrorist group would attack Israel in some manner, launch rockets or, some kind of killing on the streets, some kind of infiltration. And they have been allowed to do these things in order for there to be um, repercussions. And that's the ulterior motive. And that's the thing that's not understood by the world. All right, we'll be right back for second hour. And then I'll check out the chat room and get comments.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased, as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com. Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient.
Ask Me Anything series and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing.
Not popular, and that a lot of people take a lot of flack for speaking about the things that unite terrorism with the larger state. And, it's my belief that what we are truly witness to, what we are seeing, that this is synagogue of Satan at work behind the scenes, that this is Oz behind the mask. And yes, keys to wisdom, I do have to tippy toe, because this is, there's already so many of our shows that, well, we've been talking about and sharing, helping people to understand the false left-right paradigm, that these things are not popular by those that are working against the revelation of truth, and that are trying to maintain the status quo of deception and illusion and people misconstruing truth. They want people to support the massacre of innocents. And, I want to also highlight something that um, Stephen Ben Noon from Israeli News Live, he has been on the forefront of truth. And he is also, he's Jewish himself, Israeli. And he has come out on the truth and shared the truth of the false left-right paradigm. And he's taken a lot of flack for it. But recently he posted a video, and I do encourage people to check that out, where he speaks about and shows how even this, this rabbi from New York speaks about his connections to intelligence agencies, and how he knows without a doubt that should something occur on the border, like he talked about even, a cat breaching the border, that immediately there'd be 15 to 20 Jeeps full of IDF soldiers there to check it out and to prepare for intrusion should that occur. And So he states that the only way that this could have occurred is if it were an inside job. If some portion of the intelligence structure, because it was not a failure, they are trying to propose the idea that this was a intelligence failure and that somehow they didn't see this coming. And that is not the case. And anybody that knows how highly touted and how important security is to Israel. I mean, again, they are ever since the creation of Israel in 1948, immediately on the day that Israel was declared a state again, as Zechariah and other prophets spoke about that, Israel will come into being again in a single hour, in a single day. How a nation would be born in a single day, and the unlikelihood of such, and yet this was prophetically fulfilled. And since that time, like immediately, 6 nations, Arab nations, went to war against Israel, and the world was surprised that they survived and actually won and defeated their enemies in that conflict. And how they were even able to, in 1967, to take over the fullness of Jerusalem and to unite this as a capital. And there were signs in the heavens that there was these tetrad blood red moons in 1948 and in 1967, and that these blood red moons occurred on the feasts of the Lord, which is undeniable confirmation that the Most High allowed for and prepared and allowed to occur the creation of Israel and also its survival. Uh, Shay is speaking about the unlikelihood of a steel building. Never in the history of fire has a steel structure been destroyed so that it resulted in collapse, especially in 11 seconds. Yeah, I fully agree with you, Shay. And again, this is one of those things which cannot be explained. And yet this happened numerous times, on 9/11. And that thermite, this component that could cut steel, and how the girders were, segmented into perfect size for being hauled away. And how it was that, Rudy Giuliani, they put GPS on all of the dump trucks, and they immediately removed all of the evidence of the greatest crime to ever take place on American soil. There was no investigation of those atrocities and the commitment of them. And yes, I fully agree with you that this was a controlled. Sharon Corley says that this was a controlled demolition. It's the only thing that makes sense, even with Larry Silverstein, who had the buildings insured for $7 billion, just a few months before the attacks, and representing some conglomerate, in the same way that we don't know who the so-called investors are of uh, the Federal Reserve System. They collected and they banked off of purchasing and owning these buildings. And there was going to be a problem with all of the asbestos that was contained within those buildings. They were going to have to be destroyed anyways. And yet, for this conveniently to occur and to happen, yeah. And for, again, I spoke about in the previous show where I commented about this occurrence, about how Marvin Bush, the cousin of George Bush, was in control of the security in the World Trade Center buildings before these events went down, and how the power for the first time in the history of these buildings was taken down, and there was no video uh, evidence, or the cameras, the security cameras were taken down for the first time. And it's my opinion that it was during that time that the buildings were seeded with these bombs, and it was those things which brought them down in 11 seconds. Because some people don't even realize that the World Trade Center 1, which I believe it was the second building to actually be hit, supposedly by these planes or missiles or whatever it was that actually hit them. But anyways, this building went down 47 minutes after this occurrence, and that it collapsed at free fall speed in 11 seconds flat. And the official story is that the jet fuel melted the steel, and that's why they pancaked in the manner that they collapsed, one floor on top of the other, until it just disintegrated to the ground in you know in the footprint of the building. It's utterly ridiculous, the official story. um Joseph says it sure seems like this action on October 4th included a stand down by Israeli forces, and I agree. I agree. Oh, and what I was saying with Stephen Ben Noon, Israeli News Live, and the video that he shares, not only did he bring forth this rabbi, but he shares the stories of other individuals that had worked with the intelligence services monitoring the border between Gaza and Israel, and how they spoke about, even, they have super high technology now, but this was going back in the 80s, and they were talking about how the borders were completely monitored, so that even if a cat breached and crossed over, they would send out security forces to check it out, and that they were monitored 24/7 by numerous different factions of the intelligence forces, and that there's no way no way that anybody could sneak across or to breach the border in the manner 300 militants on uh, paragliders with fans behind them were allowed to cross over in the early morning hours of October 4th. It is absolutely nutty that this occurred. Without a doubt, if the and also the Gaza security, the IDF that was, you know, um, monitored and placed in security in that area, they were removed. They were sent to the West Bank, according to some sources. And so these attacks were allowed to occur. And so the murder of the children, the families, the older women, and the people that were in the different kibbutz there in Israel, their blood, they were like the people in the 9/11 attacks in those buildings that were brought down, that were murdered. They were sacrifices. Without a doubt, this was a blood sacrifice that the Illuminists, the secret societies, those synagogue of Satan, they do this all the time. And this was another in a long line of those events. And I was speaking about how the false left-right paradigm and how um, the globalists allow certain things to occur in order for them to be able to engage in war and conflict. And how 9/11 started the war on terror, which Dick Cheney said would not end in our lifetimes. But that if you study and you examine and look at the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, this never occurred. And this was reported by the NSA as being a false flag event. If you examine the radar systems in World War II, they were removed from Hawaii so that the Japanese were able to succeed in their so-called surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. So, I mean, these kind of things and this kind of occurrence, they go back way back in history. Um, I don't understand exactly what you're saying, Dayton, but I'll read what you said since it's the end of the commentary. I just scrolled down and Dayton says, "Yeah, Zen, you trip me out. Lots of time acting like you don't know of lots of this content when you do." Oh, wise not to speak much. Yes, I agree. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you as well. he says thanks and wish you spoke more. Thanks for telling it. I tried to do what I can to share the truth. I mean, it's hard for me to stand back and not speak about the things that I know. But I also know that, these kind of things get us into trouble as a channel. And so I'm trying to be careful because I want to continue to have this platform to tell you the truth and to share it with you. But I also know that the powers that be, that we're targeted by them and that we're on their list for deletion and um, they are messing with us, hiding our numbers, deleting our videos, unsubscribing our listeners. It's difficult to try to utilize the platforms that we have to share the truth because we're just targeted and there's no other way around it. But I again thank all of you and let us continue. I want to cover a few more things. I want to share a few things with you that you may not be aware of. And one has to do with the occult technology of power. Because again, I have shared this document with you long before. And it's one that I discovered many, 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 many years ago. It's got to be 20 some years ago. And it's written by Anonymous, and it's one that not a lot of people are familiar with. And it's very intriguing because one of the professors, one of the authors in it is Carol Quigley, who taught Bill Clinton. He was the author of Tragedy and Hope, a book that really discusses and shares, teaches about the New World Order, and is written for the globalists, but is accessible by us. But I'll share with you, I just want to share the introduction of this book, and so you can get an idea as to why you might want to read it and the scope of how it is that the elite raise certain individuals with authority to rule over the masses. And that certainly presidents are chosen this way because of bloodline and their connections to certain royal families. And that is the way of it. But anyways, the opening says, "To my son, the world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes." Benjamin Disraeli. All right. Let me take a sip of water here. And then we'll get into this final portion of the show. In this thin volume, you will find the transcripts of your initiation into the secrets of my empire. Read them again, not for the arcane knowledge, which is now second nature to you, but in order to re experience the shock and awe you felt 20 years ago when at age 30, the fabulous scope of my power was revealed to you by my trusted and now mostly departed advisors. Remember the surprise to the point of disbelief with which you beheld the invisibly delicate but invincible chains of deceit, confusion, or coercion with which we finance capitalists and enslave this chaotic world. Remember the feats of will and strategy that have been required to retain our position. And then inspect your retinue carefully. Your heir must be equal to and eager for the task, much as you were. Choose him carefully. As I lie here waiting for the end, I can afford to relish the thought of our empire lasting forever, as I never dared while in charge. Rational power, calculations, so easily disrupted by the thrill of power, are now entirely in your hands. The motto from Aleister Crowley: know, will, dare, and be silent. Okay, so that was the opening. And then I'm going to read the first portion of the first chapter. And then we'll get into some other things. But I think this is important. And again, this was a book that was written for the son of one of these elitists. And it was written to initiate him into the charge and also to the Ponzi scheme of what is financial wealth, the Federal Reserve System, how Satan creates money out of nothing, stock markets, all the things that they use to extend to create their power and their wealth. So it says, my son, the time has arrived to make formal what you have confidently awaited for some years. Of all your brothers, sisters, and cousins, as well as the offspring of my close allies, I have chosen you to be heir to my empire. All the trust funds, foundations, and accounts through which my empire is controlled shall pass into your hands upon my retirement. All my alliances, understandings, and enmities with my handful of peers around the globe shall gradually become yours. Over the next 20 years, we shall collaborate closer and closer, you and I, until we finally act as one. For 10 years, you have toured my empire in a succession of managerial assignments and are now familiar with the outward operations of my crucial banking, foundation, governmental, and think tank organizations. Until now, my advisors and I have deflected your questions as to how and if my diverse operations and holdings, which seem autonomous and even contradictory, are integrated into an organic whole. to serve the dynasty interests. The fact that you asked these questions, rejecting my carefully nurtured public image as an idle coupon clipping philanthropist, was a major factor in the high esteem in which I hold you. Most of your competitors found puppet leadership in any one of my organizations so awesome and gratifying that they immediately eliminated themselves from the contest for the top position which you have won. Such men of limited vision are necessary for my success. They bend unconsciously to the subtle pressures to which I expose them. They can be led in any direction. I choose by simple-minded rationalizations, aimed at their vanity without being privy to my motives, which would be short-lived secrets in their undisciplined and envious minds. Most important in your selection as my successor, however, was your psychological nature, which has been faithfully reported to me over the years by my associates, many of whom have advanced psychological training. A man in my position must have total mastery over his emotions. All actions affecting the power of the dynasty must be taken on the basis of coldly reasoned power calculations. If the dynasty is to survive and prosper at the expense of its subjects and rivals, all power is impossible to those whose pursuit is ruled by sentimentality, love, envy, power lust, revenge, prejudice, hatred, justice, alcohol, drugs, or sexual desire. Sustained power is impossible to those who repress all their irrational longings into their subconscious only to have them return in compulsive, out of control behavior that inevitably leads to their ruin. Although often clothed in the rationalizations of power calculation, compulsive behavior is at root the emotionalism of a frightened child, desperately projecting his inner agony into a reality he is afraid to understand, much less master. Although you now must begin to pursue it consciously, you have already displayed the alienation from your emotional nature that is so essential to achieving real worldly power. You must recognize your emotional nature as a primitive survival mechanism that was appropriate for the jungle and perhaps useful to common men, but useless for the tasks that confront us finance capitalists. Attachment to what you do just because you do it is the primary psychological characteristic of ordinary mortals. Such cognitive dissonance spells disaster for us. Our emotional mechanisms make our lives worth living, but is no guide to the occult arts of intrigue. So continue to gratify your senses and emotions fully at your leisure. As long as the empire prospers, you will have the resources to indulge in systematic gratification, which will leave your irrational urges satiated and therefore powerless. You will never be in the unenviable position of the middle class strivers who must, from lack of resources, repress their emotional natures if they are to attain any power, whatever, during their lives. Typically, they end up taking their pleasure from the victories and cruelties of their struggle. Thus, their end ceases to be power, and they eventually defeat themselves with reckless behavior in pursuit of dominant thrills. I have brought you into seclusion with my most trusted advisors in order to inaugurate a new phase of your instruction. Your formal training in the official political economic world is now complete. This weekend will mark the beginning of your training in the occult technology of power that lurks behind outer appearances. As your tutors will explain, occult or secret knowledge is the basis of all power in human society. So I use the word occult advisedly in its pristine usage. As I am sure that you are aware by now, productivity in itself does not secure power and therefore does not secure the gratifications of life. After all, slaves can be productive. None of my organizations in which you served so well are concerned with advancing the techniques of satisfying human needs and desires. Rather, all are dedicated to the surreptitious, surreptitious centralization of productive, but especially coercive efforts in my hands, or in creating the intellectual climate in which such veiled control would be tolerated in the future. I destroy or paralyze productive efforts that cannot be ensnarled in my web. After, and we're almost done here. After a break, Professor A will take the floor in order to put finance capitalism into full biological perspective. His short talk will be followed by similar abbreviated summaries by his 6 associates, all of whom you know well. The rest of the weekend will be devoted to forthright fielding of your questions. So again, the occult technology of power I want to share one last thing from this occult technology of power. And it's something that I've shared previously. And it has to do with the false left-right paradigm. And I recommend that you read the entirety of chapter 2 because it covers in great detail what I'm going to summarize in short passage. But this is the most important aspect of the left and the right and the illusion of difference that creates political interest and the pursuit of idealism amongst people. So much so that people are caught up in supporting the right or the left when really they are the same thing. And people spend so much energy and so much time in supporting politically the Democrats or the Republicans when the elephant and the donkey are really the same thing. They're controlled by the same faction. That politics is a dog and pony show. And like the Kentucky Derby, where you can bet on the horses and those that are running, and that one of them will eventually win the race and become so-called president and the representative of government. But this individual is nothing but a horse that is owned by someone, and that is fed and taken care of and raised in a manner so that they can win the race. But the race is all a dog and pony show. It's all just illusion. Presidents are nothing but puppets on a string. They are just the face of the blood royals that are put out there to control the narrative. Because all the world is a stage, as Shakespeare said. So, the so called left right political spectrum is our creation. In fact, it accurately reflects our careful artificial polarization of the population on phony issues that prevents the issue of our power from arising in their minds. The left supports civil liberties and opposes economic or entrepreneurial liberty. The right supports economic liberty and opposes civil liberty. Of course, neither can exist fully, which is our goal, without the other. We control the right and left conflict such that both forms of liberty are suppressed to the degree that we require our own liberty, and it rests not on legal or moral rights, but on our control of the government, bureaucracy, and courts which apply the complex subjective regulations which we dupe the public into supporting for our benefit. Innumerable meaningless conflicts to divert the attention of the public from operations find fertile ground in the bitter hatreds of the right-left imbroglio. Right and left are irreconcilable on racial policy, the treatment of criminals, law enforcement, pornography, foreign policy, women's liberty, and censorship, to name just a few of the issues. Although censorship in the name of fairness has been useful in broadcasting and may yet be required in journalism, we generally do not take sides in these issues. Instead, we attempt to prolong the conflicts by supporting both sides as required. War, of course, is the ultimate diversionary conflict and the health of our system. War provides the perfect cover of emergency and crisis behind which we consolidate our power. And since nuclear war presents dangers even to us, more and more we have resorted to economic crisis, energy shortages, ecological hysteria, and managed political drama to fill in the gap. Meaningless brushfire wars, though, always remain useful. We promote phony free enterprise on the right and phony democratic socialism on the left, and thus we obtain a free enterprise whose competition is carefully regulated by the bureaucracy we control, and whose nationalized enterprises are controlled directly through and by our government. In this way, we maintain a society in which the basis of our power, legal titles to property and money, remain secure, but in which the peril of free, unregulated competition is avoided and popular sovereignty is nullified. The democratic process is a sitting duck for our money and power. Invariably, we determine the candidates of the major parties and then proceed to pick the winners. Any attempts at campaign reforms simply put the rules of the game more firmly under our government's control. Totalitarianism of the fascists of communist varieties is no danger to us as long as bastions of private property remain to serve as our basis of operation. Totalitarian governments of both right and left, because of the vulnerability of their highly visible leaders to party rivals, can be manipulated easily from abroad. Primarily, totalitarian dictatorships efficiently prevent new money lords that could challenge our power from arising in whole continents, civilizations, and races. All right, I think we're going to stop it there. But as I said, it continues on. That was part 3 of the occult technology of power. And so let me check the chat and we'll share a few comments. Ye are Elohim, love the name, says there is no choice. Yahuwah sets all the kings on the throne. Watchman 3:16, the illusion of choice. Exactly. It is all the illusion of choice. Everything is staged. Tom Gennaro says that current events don't just happen, they are planned well in advance. Absolutely 100% true. Dr. Herbalist says, thank you, Zen. That was a good read. You are welcome, my brother, and I am glad that we were able to finish up this show with that reading, which again is the false left right paradigm. And it tells you directly how, again, the elites, these industrialists, these globalists who believe that they have the divine right of kings to rule over the masses. And remember, these are the blood royal, those that sit on the thrones of the world today. They are the seed of Cain. They are the ones that are at enmity with us as the seed of the woman. Hebrew Hawaiian says, thank you so much, Zen. We always learn so much from your readings. You are so very welcome, sister. True Seeker in a service, thank you, Zen. Mods and everyone here love you all. Great show and fellowship. Good night. God bless. Be safe. Yes, you as well, brother. And so, again, yes, the bloodlines. This is what we are at war against. They are, again, Oz behind the mask. And so, understanding this concept, it'll keep you from getting caught up in supporting either side because they're playing off your sympathies. They want you to believe that there is some kind of victim and that they're putting forth that they are the victim. And it's always the Hegelian directive is problem, reaction, solution. They allow for the problem to exist. They force a reaction, which, especially if it's some kind of false flag event, this emotionally consumes and occupies the masses with emotional, puts us on an emotional roller coaster. And it gets everybody to feel a certain way. And they are leading the directive, they are leading the response, they are guiding the reaction towards what they have planned as solution. Donna Cornell says, wizards behind the curtain, bless you, Zen. Exactly, sister. They are wizards behind the curtain. Watchman 316 says building 1 and 2 had thousands of Jewish employees, including Larry Silverstein's family, and they didn't show up for work that day. Not one Jewish person perished on 9/11. Yeah, there was a whole company, I forget the name of it, but every one of their employees were told not to show up for work. They were called. And even Benjamin Netanyahu on 7/7 during the London bombings, where that happened, he was told not to go in. So anyway, that's